thought it would be interesting to create synergies and working groups on places of memory, this heritage sites. And as you all know, there is an interest in these former prisons that 150, 120 years ago were out of the city centers, but now everywhere in Europe and in the world the cities have grown and these prisons are now in the city centers due to democratic regulation processes. The current prison system has sought to create prisons in more comfortable places, and these old buildings are slightly uncomfortable. They're like monsters in the midst of the city. We don't know what to do with them, with layers and layers of history, memory, human density, and relationships with the neighborhood and the cities. The inside and the outside of these buildings are full of life and memory, of course, and history and heritage. Construction renovations linked to a renewal of the prison system in the first 2 decades of the 20th century and at the end of the 19th century, and the informal groups like us who are part of this process and who study prisons. In this regard, Fabienne Huard-Hardy is someone we met recently. We haven't known each other for a long time, but we were in a seminar on architecture at the School of Architecture in Paris, and I thought it would be interesting to have a general perspective and overview. I mean, before starting, we said that many of us, the first thing we do when we go and visit a city, even if we're there on holiday, is go and visit a prison. Some have an obsession with visiting cemeteries, which are also important points. We want to visit uncomfortable places like prisons. Fabienne does this, and more than we do, because that's her job. And I think it was interesting also for France to have a network studying prison systems and prisons. I mean, you have a PhD in law and criminology, if I'm not mistaken, so also from a perspective of law, but with experience in heritage and museography. And I thought it was an interesting profile because it's something we don't have in Spain. And perhaps it might be convenient to have such a profile. We have had dissonant experiences when preparing our project on uncomfortable heritage, to go up to Cáceres to organize a seminar in the prison there, to open up the prison, or even in Segovia, where there was a small interpretation and museography project in the prison in Segovia. We weren't allowed in. We had to go to the ministry, and apparently between the Ministry of Home Affairs and Heritage, there's a figure who in theory should manage this, but they only deal with construction of new prisons, so it's an issue of heritage protection. But at the end of the day, other people like us who are interested in this, and associations reclaiming memory, who are always claiming for the memory of their loved ones who were shot, well, we're not allowed access to these old prisons. So I think there is a need for you to tell us more about your organization or your position and the examples that I'm sure that you will give us from around France. There are all sorts of examples. Prisons that have been destroyed, others that are being recovered, or the prison of La Santé, which will be kept as a prison. I won't go on. I feel truly passionate about this, so please forgive me for going on. This is a brief introduction. Thank you for being with us, and welcome. And the floor is yours.
this invitation, which allows us to exchange and heritage practices between neighbors. I am in charge of the Ressources Center on the History and Crimes and Punishment at the French National School of Prison Administration, and I am also collections curator. As an historian, it's interesting to understand the protection of heritage within the institution itself. It's not a question of conveying the voice of an institution, but of presenting what the prison does and wants to do with this heritage. And so I will divide my speech into 4 parts. At the first, a preface that will attempt to define what it means by penitentiary heritage in France. Written and graphic heritage, establishment plans, photographic collection from the late 18th century to the present day, enriched by collection from artists that offer a different perspective on the prison system. Books on the theme of prison, punishment, and crime. We hold more than 15,000 documents, sometimes unique works, and the library of a criminologist from the late 19th century, Gabriel Tard. And the object, the movable heritage, quite disparate. It's constantly being enriched by donation from former prison officers who entrust to the community what they were led to preserve at a time when these traces were condemned to destruction. Various objects and the state of the collection reveal a micro-history. We can identify those who have survived unexpectedly and those that showed sometimes incongruous rescue. The randomness of numerous collections introduce biases in preservation with a significant number of certain items and the absence of others. In any case, we do not have an exhaustive collection of penitentiary traces and can only lament the disappearance of certain traces and the lack of traceability of others. The presence of everyday mundane objects also responds to a more ethnographic collection campaign that is not without interest. At the real estate, it is necessary to distinguish between heritage properties, which means those that have been registered or classified in the heritage inventory in France, mainly because of their remarkable character. Some prisons have disappeared and are known only through plans, elevations, and photographs. It's the case, so we have Autun, the Bentham Panopticon, it's a disappeared architecture. It's now a supermarket. We also have the heritage protection of sites or even small parts of prison for their importance as a memorial, or even complete heritage protection for historical and memorial reasons, such as the Montluc prison in Lyon, the prison memorial site of resistance, and the patrimonialization of the Memorial National, the Montluc prison. From a military prison to a penitentiary after the war, once decommissioned, its heritage is rooted in the turmoil of the occupation. Today, many penal institutions bear witness to this period and honor the memory of the fighters. Once their penitentiary function has been ceased, these traces of remembrance will influence the purpose of the buildings. Finally, there are the buildings which are considered to be of heritage value, but for which decommissioning. This is the case of La Santé in Paris, which has undergone a facelift, meaning restoration in order to preserve the historical significance of the building in the urban environment. However, the renovation has been sought through in the light of European prison regulation, dignity, and the new meanings given to sentencing. It's a case of the redesign of the main entrance door. I will end this section on the immaterial heritage, the memory of what the prison used to be. The difficulty lies in collecting memories of former inmates. And here it is the academic work that can help and understand the meaning of the prison, or documentarians. The history of the heritage preservation in France, it's a long history. I could say it all began in 1889, the Universal Exhibition celebrating the centenary of the French Revolution. It was an opportunity for this new Third Republic to communicate about its public services, about what it would do better than previous regime. The director of the penitentiary administration at the time, Louis Herbet, proposed a showcase for his institution within the exhibition itself, 100 linear meters in which the French Revolution, in which everything about the prison would be presented. What is no longer the break of the French Revolution, 1789 and 1791, the penal code, in which the prison becomes a cornerstone of the system, and thus a presentation of the punishment of the old regime, but also what it has become, on your view. The plan, models, especially the new ones, the strength of the penitentiary system with a display of the work done by the inmates, but also the works done by the staff. It's a very political exhibition, a publicity campaign to promote innovation. It's also about reassuring the public by showing them that the system works and that good people are safe. It will also express the wish that the object collected should find a place in a permanent museum, and I come before, which he considers to be useful for society, but he will also point out the risk of preserving this object. The idea of a national museum was third launched, but with a strong link between the collections associated with the institution and society, which could be interested in them. Needless to say, this museum never came to fruition and remains described in a work of over 300 pages. The collections partially disappeared after an exhibition in St. Petersburg during the Penitentiary Congress. The second stage in the attempt to create a prison museum will emerge in 1967 when a judge who was in charge of penal labor organized an exhibition of the production. It's only truly known to us through this photographic album and the some panels we kept. The collections were relaunched in 1975 by the same magistrate and again in the 80s by historians. These were also the years in which the ethnographic heritage preservation began to develop, and the heritage of the prison is fully part of the affirmation of an identity or even multiple identities. This would reinforce the idea of collecting ordinary objects, everyday objects, with seemingly trivial nature becomes the reason of their preservation. At the end of the 80s, like a long-lost idea, Herbet's concept was fast, and following the definitive closure of the Fontainebleau prison, the decision was taken to finally create a national prison museum in a setting that recalled the cell architecture of the 19th century. Catherine Prade, the curator, will be in charge, but unfortunately, the school in Apt moved from Fleury-Mérogis, near Paris, to Agen in the south, and we are there. In 2000, which was a source of professional visitors in training, has dried up. The resources are no longer sufficient to meet the original ambitions, and the lack of maintenance in the building has put the collection at risk and limited the opening hours. It has been decided to close between 2010 and 2012. The future of the collection will consist of a provisional solution. Part of the collection will be entrusted to the new school set up in Agen since 2000 to be used for the training of students. Another part will be stored in unsuitable condition in the central building of Clairvaux, and the rest, I don't know. Since the closure of Clairvaux, the objects that were part of the collection of the museum have been returned to Paris by the Department of Archives and Heritage of the Ministry of Justice in order to join our collection in Agen. Today's policy of acquiring movable prison artifacts follows on from Herbert's legacy. At the crossroad of ethnographic heritage, without regard to artistic and financial value, the aim is to collect penitentiary traces in their entirety so that historians and future citizens can understand what the prison object was. The future is ahead of us as the project for Museum of the Penitentiary Administration, which means that it will also include the probation services, has been approved, and the first stone of the building should be laid on a plot of land opposite of the school within a pole of history and applied criminology. And now the prison architecture and what it could be more interesting for you. Architectural heritage designation is much more difficult, at least for the institution itself. Faced with the fact that the heritage interest of prisons clashes with the utility of the building, whether initially intended to be a prison or not. I will not elaborate on the role of prisons in post-revolutionary decision to establish them in forts and abbey, and the positive impact this may have had, considering that they were not used as quarries like other places such as Royaumont near Paris. I think about Fontevraud, Clairvaux, Aix, sometimes altered, but still there. I am far from suggesting that the prison should be given a blank check in this role. However, it should be noted that the protection of Fontevraud Abbey took place before the end of penitentiary activity, and that certain parts of the estate, particularly kitchens, were already protected by the end of the 19th century. The works were monitored by the penitentiary agent, we can saw one, supervised by the Culture Ministry. What interests us more is the heritage status of purely penitentiary buildings. And here, history left little room for sensitivity. History, political history, and prison history collide themselves. And we have in Fontevraud a space dedicated for the history of the prison who stayed 200. Until very recently, and indeed until now, the fate of prison building has often been predetermined. There is strong urban development pressure on vast tracts of land in the heart of urban centers, and no support from the institutions that use the building during their useful life. Once separated from the institution, the building revert to the state, which does not know what to do with them. Take a look at the advertisement post on the domain website, sessionimmobilier.gouv, under the heading Detention Center, where you can either become the owner for a former prison or respond to a call for ideas, as it's the case for the Maison d'Arrêt of Caen, where they are seeking ideas relating to the conversion of the seat. Outside the prison service, the military prison Cherche Midi in Paris was demolished in 1966. It was a place of detention for Dreyfus, a place of incarceration during the Second World War and at the time of liberation. However, demolished despite its historical value due to its remarkable Auburnian architecture. Only a granite stele remains as a memorial to this place during the war. The site is now occupied by the School of Advanced Studies. At the beginning of 80s, a little later, the fate of the Petite Roquette in Paris was decided despite the support of activist actors during the unities of the 70s. Michel Verne, an architect, along with former members of the GIP, mobilized to save the fortress prison, of which only the main entrance gate remained. The support of intellectuals, Foucault, Barthes, historians, Michel Perrault, Mona Ozouf, and architects, Jean Prouvé or Claude Parent, who spoke of an architectural masterpiece of historical value and even of beauty. Nothing worked, but it is certain that the prison was not seen as a wall. Beyond an architectural heritage, Hippolyte Lebas, beyond an institutional heritage, the intimate aspect of the prison was not considered. To speak of penitentiary heritage is to speak of social heritage, not just institutional heritage. An object that would encompass not only history, but also memories, a polyphony, staff, inmates, residents, that is part of our common heritage. Do we judge society by the way it punishes? Challenges now. What are the issues within the National School of Prison Administration through the valorization of object collections? The historical discipline, supported by a visit to the museum space, is part of a competence unit aimed at improving the knowledge of the institution. A specific heritage syllabus is offered to senior manager, prison service directors, and probation and reintegration directors as a practical heritage awareness module proposed to them as future leader. During their second placement, they are required to research and study a case study of some specific object found in the prison where they have been placed, followed by a presentation to the group and a decision on whether to repatriate the object based on an interest. In actual fact, since July 2024, the director of the prison administration has sent a memo on heritage to the interregional directorates and prison service directors, asking them to identify and propose to my service any object in their establishment that is no longer in use and could be of historical value. These course sessions contribute to what I have called taking ownership of the family album. In addition to the physical traces that gives the theoretical courses a tangible character. To work on the memory of former staff helps to bridge the gap between the old and the new. Not all of them come from penitentiary dynasties, where the tradition was passed on within the family. An hypothesis that the transmission of history allows the creation of a common culture and would be the historical pillar in the acquisition of a professional identity. A deferred evaluation of the 184th cohort of prison guard takes into account the experience of the learners. A guard remarks, the history lessons are interesting to know where we come from. But that is not enough, even if the legitimate function of preserving history are there, common culture, part of an identity. We are trying to go further by working on the objectives and the means. The idea is to provide to students with the elements that will allow them to develop a free and at least critical spirit, without, of course, deviating from ethical obligations, in order to combat the preconceived ideas about prison that are often propagated in society and brought back with them. This is one of the objectives of integrating the exhibition of objects of violence into the initial training course as a prelude to a course on the analysis of ethical practices. It also helps to counter the idea that the prison is some kind of spontaneous creation, and thus to show a certain degree of progress in detention regime. They can always be challenged, they can always be improved. Beyond our students, it is with the public outside the institution that the transmission of this memory, which should be collective, is important. This will lead to a more direct questioning of society's image of the prison today. Being a guardian of the past and of past coercive practices inevitably involves a discussion of the prison today. This approach is part of a process of civic discovery and is open to discussion as well as to the presentation of recent developments and the implementation of new measures. We pay special attention to school children. As part of the educational agreement, we participate in the civic education program and complete the cycle of presentation on the criminal justice system after the visit to the court. The aim is not to reintroduce the intimidating function of punishment through visits, but to participate in the educational chain, to offer an educational approach, and also to break down stereotypes and preconceptions about the prison, its staff, prisoners, and imprisonment. Finally, as a conclusion, I would like to say a few words about the future of this heritage, especially the pitfalls that have been identified, and above all, the roadmap that we have set out within our service in order to preserve this heritage through critical valorization. The project to create a museum for the prison administration demonstrates the value attributed to the collection and the clear usefulness of using them for training purpose. Moreover, the fact that this project is being promoted by the prison administration itself has been criticized. While the independence of the discourse is questioned by some, I can attest to a scientific approach aimed at rethinking the valorization of the collections from a critical angle. The emphasis is on the message. The aim is to see the enhancement of the collection as a means of explaining the meanings of punishment, highlighting the criticism leveled at the prison system, and at the same time, the relative usefulness of imprisonment in a country that abolished the death penalty more than 40 years ago. There is a strong desire for the future museum to be not just an apology for a system, but a place for understanding what inmates go through and the job of a prison officer. Also, the work has begun, the drafting of a scientific and cultural project for the future museum will allow for the finalization of a scientific committee composed of personality for the university and museum world, as well as penitentiary staff. the current economic situation, very difficult, will have consequences on the volumes of acquisition as well as on the resources allocated for the normal management of a museum. It's ultimately necessary in order to open up a world that is inherently closed, a restitution of history and heritage to a society that cannot and must not ignore the deprivation of freedom and its consequences. And so, as I have a little bit time, I will read you a text by the Dr. Brent Glass, Director Emeritus at the Smithsonian National Museum and Senior Advisor to the Sing Sing Prison Museum Project, who contacted us 1 week ago. And I read his text. Upon completion, the Sing Sing Prison Museum aspires to join the International Coalition of Seats of Conscience, a worldwide network of historic sites and museums that encourage awareness and empathy. And I like the word empathy. Promote civic engagement and raise important questions about justice and injustice. By calling attention to the complex history of crime and punishment, this new museum will challenge visitors to think about issues that are both timeless and timely. In many ways, the history of Sing Sing is disturbing and dark. However, there are examples of progressive reform and today a culture of change that is transforming life within the prison walls. And so it was the text of Brent Glass. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fabienne. We are open the floor to any questions, comments before a coffee break.
Thank you for the presentation. It has been really interesting. And I'm wondering, what is the role, if any, of the associations, possible associations of former inmates or inmates' families in the recovery of this heritage?
If I understand well, we don't have inmates association and family inmates association. We thought to contact inmates with probation, with the probation services to participate for visits. But it's not at the time. It's only a project. It's not really, but it's a project, of course. It could be a reinsertion, it's difficult for French, to reintroduce an inmate in the society. It could be a way. And of course, we will have discuss with central administration and the director of the probation, the big director of probation. And so it could be a way. It's difficult.
Yeah. Well, just a technical thing. I mean, there are different. The prisons in France are different owners. I mean, sometimes they are city council, sometimes a region, sometimes at the state, or this is only about the state heritage on prisons. And then, second question, what is the relation in between when a project or a problem or a debate about this heritage is launching?
When we have a prison in activity. It belongs to the state. And it's the directory of the prison administration who manage it. But at the end of this activity, the building returned to the state in the patrimony state. And then it's sometime only state or sometime department or region, big department, who manage the future of this building. And the case of Caen, it's a discussion between the city of Caen and the state to decide what's the future. And in this case, and in every cases, citizen association will have a role to preserve sometimes the building. And it was the case in Toulouse. We saw it. It's a museum of the city of Toulouse. The building continued to belong to the state, but it was location, long-time location. And it's only for the front part, not the real prison, which is more interesting. Because of, in this front part, we have a memorial site, because during the occupation, fighters was killed in the place. And so it's difficult to say what was the future for a prison. It's too complicated for state to decide the conservation. It's not their role. It's not the role of the Ministry of Justice to conserve. It's the same way for courts. It's also the same. If we have parts was protected, as like Autun, it was Autun is protected. It belongs to the state and the city. It was only Panopticon in France. We had also like that part of prison. It's a case of Puy-en-Velay in the center. And we have only this part for the church in the prison, and all of the prison is in activity, and it's sometimes difficult to combine activity of a prison and patrimonialized area. During the European Journey of Patrimony, it's difficult, but you can visit it during this time. And it's the same in Niort. It's an activity, a building in activity.
Thank you. Coffee time? Yeah. Well, thank you, Fabienne. we will work with your network also together in the future and in the present. Not to forget, I want to thank also for the work of translation and also the team who is organizing and helping here. Ricard, David, Uriol, Fernanda, and of course you and with your organization. Thank you and see you later after the coffee.